The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
Michael Eck is here. He works over at Proctor's. He is also in a band, I forgot already. The River...
Ramblin' Jug Stompers, Lost Radio Rounders.
You can catch his band around. He was in a band in the 80s called the Stompolistics. He could rock, too, way back, but...
Thank you.
Anyway, okay, the book is called The Song Machine, Inside the Hit Factory. It's about how music is made these days with the, Britney Spears of the world and people like that. And it's a lot different than back when, I guess, John and Paul got together and wrote songs, but it's a lot different now. So Michael's going to tell us about the book. So here's Michael Eck.
Thank you. Kind of an exciting morning for me. On the way in, they were announcing the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees, and this year, for the first time, I was a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame voter. So I was glad to see some of the acts I put a bid in for make it. There's a story I like to tell about my youth as a record collector. It's been spun more than a few times. It's burnished even, rubbed in like the worn-out grooves on a well-loved vinyl album. It's got scratches and pops and skips, but it still plays, and I still like to tell it. It begins, of course, with the radio, but also with the jukebox. I'm 51, and that means I was 5 in 1969, which is about when my musical memory begins. Honky-tonk women, Bad Moon Rising, Get Back, Time of the Season. My parents listened to country radio, my brothers to top 40. There was a time, on what seemed like the long drives to my aunt's house, that I'd hear both, literally, at the same time. We bought plastic bags of old jukebox 45s at the L.J. Mullen Pharmacy in Delmar. They were cast-offs, old hits and never weres. My brother Billy would hold, and I remember this very specifically, he'd hold it on his knees. He'd hold a battery-operated turntable, playing both sides of each disc to discover what was hidden there, oblivious of the fact that Susan Rae was singing LA International Airport to my parents in the front seat. It gave me an open mind about music. I can still recall the slightly acrid, electric smell of a Seabrook jukebox, like the one at Charlie Sanders' restaurant, not far from our house, across from the toll gate and the post office in Slingerlands. Everybody's talking, Galveston, Poke Salad Annie, the choking kind. Strong memories, building blocks for a life in music. Eventually, I started to buy my own records. I was always about albums, not singles. Joe and I were just talking about that a little bit. I was an album guy. Obscure was fine. Forget Buffalo Springfield. While still in grade school, I owned Dewey Martin and the Medicine Ball, purchased like so many other finds at a garage sale. I duct taped a radio, a very sweet memory. I duct taped a radio to the handlebars of my bicycle, listening to the early freeform strains of WQBK on trips to Record Town in Delmar at the Delaware Plaza. On the return, I would hold the latest album, Thin Lizzy's Live and Dangerous, Bob Seger's Stranger in Town, Bruce Springsteen's Darkness on the Edge of Town. I'd hold it with my thumbs against the handlebars, my heart thrumming with anticipation, waiting to get home and listen to that record. I lived for record conventions, a geek's paradise, buying dollar box surprises in bulk with babysitting money. At age 13, I purchased my own stereo, an unknown brand called Monteverdi, a turntable, 2 speakers, $78. At that time, it was the biggest layout of my life. Finally, at age 18, my father walked into my bedroom. I remember this day, clear as a bell. He walked into my bedroom and he asked me to come downstairs. He pointed. The sheer weight of my record collection, stuffed in the telephone company cable boxes that he bought home from his job as a lineman, had cracked the ceiling underneath my room. It's always been that way. If it's associated with music, I've done it, be it working in a hellhole nightclub while still a teenager, playing Captain Beefheart and MC5 on college radio, or clerking in too many record stores to remember. Done it. Gigging, solo, and in bands, done it. Producing records for other artists, producing a public radio live concert series, producing live concerts for dozens and hundreds. Yep, selling CDs online, been there, and as some of you may know, writing about music for a living for over 30 years, that too. All of which makes me the right audience for John Seabrook's book, The Song Machine, Inside the Hit Factory. I can recall the first time I engaged with Seabrook's ideas about the business. It was within the pages of New Yorker, where he's been a staff writer for 20 years. First, it was a piece on the seemingly odd phenomenon of K-pop, Korean pop, a well-oiled hit factory that supplies Asia with an endless stream of young acts with beautiful, chiseled faces, sunny demeanors, and chirpy voices. Next, it was an investigation of the music streaming service, Spotify. Finally, it was a fascinating look at how today's hits are literally manufactured in studios resembling laboratories more than temples of creativity. I Want It That Way, Right Round, Since You've Been Gone, Umbrella, Roar. These are all products, sonic gizmos designed to shift units. But this isn't new. Since the time of Stephen Foster, mid-19th century, hits have been made. Music has been a business. As Hunter S. Thompson once said, the music business, I love this, the music business is a cruel and shallow money trench, a long plastic hallway where thieves and pimps run free and good men die like dogs. And there's also a negative side. Seabrook's book, which begins with him allowing his son, the boy, to curate tunes on the morning commute, is about both sides of that Hunter S. Thompson quote. It's certainly a tome that focuses on the past 20 years, but it sagely puts things in context by taking a stroll through various hit factories of the past, starting with T.B. Harm's Tin Pan Alley publishing juggernaut in the early 20th century. In those days, song pluggers performed the latest songs of the day from Jerome Kern, George and Ira Gershwin, Cole Porter, and Richard Rodgers on pianos in music stores, urging the sale of sheet music in a time when people still entertained themselves at home. To find the first hit factory of the record era, Seabrook writes, you'd have to head up Century 30 years and uptown 30 blocks to the section of Broadway that stretched from the Brill Building at 49th Street, where Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller had an office, to 1650 Broadway at 51st, where Don Kirshner's Aldon Music was located. Lieber and Stoller, Lieber and Stoller. Now we're talking about music that people in this room might remember. Kansas City, Poison Ivy, Hound Dog, Youngblood, so many great Lieber and Stoller songs. These songs were the roots of what music impresario Jerry Wexler called R&B, or rhythm and blues. Lieber and Stoller, New York Jews, fused the heat and soul of Southern black music with the melodic sense of Broadway. Stand By Me, I Who Have Nothing, on Broadway. At Kirshner's sixth floor warren of pianos and cubicles, the Magnificent Seven, and some of these names you will know, Neil Sedaka, Howie Greenfield, Jerry Goffin, Carole King, Barry Mann, Cynthia Weil, and Jack Keller were churning out hits like The Locomotion, Up on the Roof, for acts like the Shirelles and the Drifters. These songs, Seabrook points out, were simpler than the work of Harm's stable, who didn't realize they were crafting the Great American Songbook, even though they were. Simple is good in pop music, especially when it's aimed at teens. Then came Phil Spector with his Wall of Sound, Motown, and the Kings of Philly Soul. Spector, and Motown's Berry Gordy in particular, were visionaries, spotting raw talent and refining it, developing amazing teams of songwriters, and creating magnificent studio backing bands like the Wrecking Crew and the Funk Brothers, all in the service of what Spector called teenage symphonies. Songs like He's a Rebel, Be My Baby, and River Deep Mountain High. But they were also taskmasters. Some even called them slave drivers. Gordy, we just had Motown at Proctor's recently, and it was Berry Gordy's chance to tell his story. Gordy, who controlled and micromanaged every aspect of Motown, from clothing and dance moves to notorious Friday night writers' meetings, was eventually sued by many of his top writers and performers, the engines behind Dancing in the Streets, Baby Love, Tracks of My Tears, and so many other indelible Motor City hits. By deftly racing through a litany of such song factories, Seabrook establishes a pattern that still exists today. Looking at K-pop, for example, he profiles Lee Soo-man, whose SM Entertainment produces new young prefab stars like chickens lay eggs. The performers, aged 12 to 19, are chosen for their looks, not their voices. And they're packaged by personal style, the sweet one, the edgy one, and so on. Packaged into homogeneous units that have no say in the songs they sing or the steps they dance. But Lee makes the dream come true. he makes them stars, just as Backstreet Boys in-sync mastermind Louis J. Perlman did before him. Perlman is liberty quoted throughout Seabrook's book, from his Texarkana jail cell where he's doing 25 years for fraud. It's the music business, after all. Seabrook writes, as you might expect, from a New Yorker scribe, in a direct, crisp style. He's not as quirky as Malcolm Gladwell, who some of you may have read, nor as energetic as Sandy Frazier, but he gets the job done. It's clear that he has immersed himself in modern pop deeply. He travels from his car radio to Seoul, Stockholm, sunny California, and back. By the end of the trip, the boy, as he refers to his son, is no longer a tween flipping between stations, but a young man lost in the private world of his Beats headphones. Seabrook's story moves chronologically, and its main arc traces the surprising takeover of American pop over the past few decades by Swedish songwriters, beat makers, and producers. Yes, Brits and Americans of all races figure into the mix, but each one is tangled with a Swede. We don't exactly owe everything we hear to ABBA, but then again we do. Actually, the first hero, or at least the key figure of Seabrook's narrative, is a devil-may-care hitmaker called Dennis Pop. That's Dennis with a Z, Deniz, as in Dennis the Menace, and two capital P's, capital P, lowercase o, capital P. It is frankly his disco name. Many, maybe most of Seabrook's figures operate under aliases, a remnant of the club culture that fosters so many of the trends in modern music. Pop, whose real name is Dag Christer Voll, nickname Daggy, was a founder of a Stockholm-based music company called Swemix. A chain-smoking, hair-flipping, eternal teen, even at 28, Pop pioneered a method of making music without using any instruments. Other club DJs had already been remixing records, adding instrumental sections and long drum breaks to extend songs for maximum dancing pleasure, but Pop, as Seabrook says, got far more creative than that. He was aware of his lineage, the beats of James Brown, the machine-age music of German eccentrics Kraftwerk, and the fusion of both by hip-hop grandfather Afrika Bambaataa. For Pop, it was making proto-mashups of Soul to Soul and Donna Summer, or Michael Jackson and the Human League. Then, as his ambitions grew, it was creating tracks on his own from the ground up. Pop, whose credo was to let art win, was frustrated by the suggestion that his work was somehow something less than the real thing. It's easy to say producing this music is equal to pushing a button in the studio, he told a reporter in 1997. But that's like saying writing a novel is a simple push of a button on your typewriter. At Sharon Studios, Pop bred talent on both sides of the microphone, creating another world where the producer was king. The song machine is littered with disco names, alias, and AKAs. Jay-Z, Dr. Dre, E-Dub, Humana Lust, E-Type, Neo, Dr. Luke. One of the most important is Max Martin, the nom de disc of a former heavy metal singer, Martin Carl Sandburg. Unlike Pop, who died in 1998 of stomach cancer, Martin didn't just have a great ear, he also had chops. Martin remains a remarkable guitar player today and often sings all of the parts on a demo recording before an artist hears it for the first time, the harmonies as well as the lead. Just a few of Martin's hits include Backstreet Boys' As Long As You Love Me, Kelly Clarkson's My Life Would Suck Without You, Katy Perry's I Kissed a Girl, Pink's So What, Britney Spears' Hold It Against Me, Maroon 5's One More Night, and Taylor Swift's We Are Never Getting Back Together. He is, in his own way, bigger than the Beatles and Elvis Presley combined. With Martin at the helm, fully 25% of the top 100 in 2014 was created at least in part by the team of Swedes that has taken up residence in South Los Angeles. In his New Yorker piece on Swedes in the studio, Seabrook breaks down the concept of track and hook. So the cover of the book sort of alludes to this. The cover of the book is terrible. The book is much better than its cover. You probably can't see from there, but this is a musical eighth note, and inside it is a fish hook. So we'll talk a little bit about what the hook is in music. So he talks about the concept of track and hook, which is the main hit method in the 21st century. In Harm's Day, genius teams like George and Ira sat in a room together with one white man tickling out a tune on the piano, while another white man spooned Moon June rhymes over a fascinating rhythm. Now the tracks are made by a committee, with producers like Martin creating tracks, beats, simple chord structures, heavily manipulated sounds, and top-liners like Esther Dean improvising or freestyling snippets of vocal melodies over the music. Often the same track is sent to different singers to see what happens. The hook, as portrayed, the terrible artwork of Seabrook's missive, is an old musical term for the earworm that makes you want to hear a song again and again and again. In the old days, it usually came in the chorus, a magical melding of lyric and melody. Nowadays, and I don't think many of you who hear modern radio these days will be surprised, nowadays the lyrics often come as an afterthought. Martin, in fact, is Swedish enough that his early hits mangled English into strange forms. Britney Spears' Baby One More Time. The hook is Hit Me Baby One More Time. But it elides the Hit Me Baby in the title that sets up the hook because Martin, Swedish, had no idea that in America it sounded like spousal abuse rather than a young girl asking for a return phone call. Martin, who like many modern producers rarely writes lyrics, actually developed a concept called melodic math. It's hyper-specific about matching the sounds of the words to the track and to the hook, but it's barely worried about meaning. It doesn't have the crazy art of Bob Dylan's mid-60s ramblings, but it sells a lot more copies. In a fascinating scene in the book, lyricist, singer, and top-liner Bonnie McKee is actually chided for adding a few syllables to the second verse of a song because it doesn't fit Martin's melodic math equation. Seabrook rarely makes judgments in The Song Machine. He's a fan of much of what he writes about, and near the tale's final paragraphs, he relates playing songs like Brave and Wrecking Ball on acoustic guitar for his young daughter, who naturally he refers to as the girl. He marvels that, like Tin Pan Alley standards, many track and hook compositions can still be reduced to one voice and one instrument, despite their convoluted creation. He contexts relentlessly in subtle ways. Giants of the industry, illustrious record men, unknown to many who even study the minutiae of pop, are here as well. Label president Clive Davis, born in 1932, was more of a Zelig or a Forrest Gump. He was a legend, matching artists with hits from Janis Joplin, Bruce Springsteen and Aerosmith, to Earth, Wind and Fire, Whitney Houston and Toni Braxton, at imprints like CBS, Arista, RCA, and Sony. In Seabrook's world, he is the great and powerful Oz behind the game-changing American Idol. Simon Cowell may have brought the franchise stateside, but to back the curtain, Davis was actually guiding the careers of early Idol stars like Clarkson, Carrie Underwood, and Jennifer Hudson. His spats with the strong-willed Clarkson highlight both of The Song Machine and Davis's own 2013 autobiography, The Soundtrack of My Life. Another Clive, this one a white South African, Clive Calder, is even lesser known by the masses than Davis, but they bought his records and made him a very, very wealthy man. Calder, living in London at the time, branched out from his Zomba publishing company with a new label called Jive in 1981. Flock of Seagulls, Billy Ocean, Page 3 girl Samantha Fox, they helped launch the company, which opened a New York office only months after hanging the London shingle. Teaming with Barry Weiss, scion of early R&B supporter High Weiss, Jive's stateside operation became an important player in the burgeoning hip-hop movement, the home of now classic artists like Schoolie D, DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, KRS-One, and A Tribe Called Quest. In the first stint of my record store's days, those were the artists we were selling on 12-inch singles to the local DJ market, with a booth where they could sample the latest offerings before buying them in sleeves of 2 for mixing, cutting, and juggling. Calder, who would take on Backstreet Boys from Perlman's lineup, modeled Jive on Motown, and once hip-hop, R&B, and teen pop became the label's stock and trade, he remained involved at every step, including negotiations with Pop and Martin to supply songs for his biggest acts. By 2003, when he decided to make his exit from Thompson's long plastic hallway, Calder was, in Seabrook's words, for the foreseeable future, the richest man the record business has ever produced. Ever since, Calder has remained in seclusion in the Cayman Islands, happy, evidently, to let the rest of the world figure out where to find its hits. Other tales and other names wind through the Song Machine. Hitmakers like Rick Rubin, Glenn Ballard, Beyonce, and Bjorn Ulvaeus. Trends like house, techno, and EDM, and landmark disruptions like the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which deregulated the media industry and changed radio forever. All of these diversions are interesting. Some of them are fascinating. At every turn, I was prompted to stop reading and hit YouTube for a sample of huge hits that I'd never heard. I have no special dislike or disrespect for Kesha or Rihanna, but I'd never had reason to pursue their music either. Now at least I understand why Baby One More Time and Umbrella lit the globe on fire. And although she doesn't feature in any significant way in the book, I also think Miley Cyrus is a genuine talent. The Song Machine is not for the faint of heart, for those who think music is only art and not commerce. It's likely not for the casual listener either. The non-stop flow of names, famous and obscure, will daunt anyone without a working knowledge of both Burt Bacharach's Walk On By and Europe's The Final Countdown. But for true believers, those who read the liner notes, even the microscopic ones on CDs, it's a thrill ride through the past 2 decades of top 40 hit radio. The most compelling section of the Song Machine for me comes at its close. I am not related to Daniel Eck. In fact, our surnames aren't even spelled the same way, although they sound alike. But Eck, a Swede again, has changed my life in a fundamental way. I did not make use of Napster in 1999. I was barely aware of what it was. I was too busy spending way too much of my own money on CDs. I've always made record-buying runs to other cities, but visits to Northampton's Turn It Up were beginning to feel like analogs for the twitching, compulsive drug runs of the Velvet Underground's Waiting for My Man. With the advent of iTunes in 2001, I would start to come to peace with files. I purchased MP3s online, ripped tracks from a ridiculous amount of records found on library shelves. Don't tell them, Joe, but I did it. And yes, I accepted torrents from my son of Frank Sinatra and King Crimson, an anonymous youth known as My Boy. But everything changed in 2011 when Eck bought Spotify to the US. I remain a stout consumer of music. I always want to hear something new, especially if it's, say, string band music from the 1920s or a krautrock classic I missed on the first go-round. But instead of breaking my meager personal bank account, I now Spotify such stuff. And yes, I use it as a verb. Spotify. Seabrook points out that Spotify is what the techies call frictionless. It feels easy. I pay for the premium service. Artists and fans argue about the royalty structure, but as someone who's worked in some aspect or another of the music industry my entire adult life, I justify it in my own way and move on. I hope that Mark Ribot and Roseanne Cash, both polled by Seabrook in the book, both favorites of mine, will forgive me. I like the fact that the world with Spotify is at my fingertips. In the car, right now, little Honda out in the parking lot. For when I want to listen to something I own, I have a thumb drive, the size of a chiclet. It's packed with 32 gigs of mandolin music. The equivalent amount of vinyl albums would fill the back seat of the car and likely part of the trunk. Over the past 3 years, I have purchased 3 physical albums, CDs. Joe Henry's Invisible Hour, Rhiannon Giddens' Tomorrow Is My Turn, and just last week, the finally remastered reissue of Van Morrison's Astral Weeks. I haven't broken the shrink wrap on the latter, but I have listened to the former pair many, many times on Spotify. It doesn't break my ceiling. Thank you. It's not going to stay. Yeah, I'd love to have some questions. Anybody got something? Does anybody know any of the hit songs of today?
I have a question. What is Spotify exactly?
Spotify is awesome. It's Swedish for awesome. So Spotify is a music streaming service. So one of the things Joe and I were talking about before I came in is that I really appreciated the fact, I would have knocked the book if it didn't do it. When Seabrook goes back through some of those other hit factories of the past, the first one he goes to is Harms, but as I mentioned, this goes back to Stephen Foster. Stephen Collins Foster, America's first great songwriter. There wasn't a business when he started. He sort of helped invent the business. He died at age 37, a penniless drunk. At the end of his life, he was selling songs for $25. Hard Times, imagine selling Hard Times for $25. It's such a valuable copyright. But he was trying to make any kind of money he could. So the things Seabrook talks about, people arguing with each other about credit on the songs, people arguing about royalties, basically slave drivers running the company, all of that stuff has never changed. The music has never changed. Now, I mean that in a philosophical way. Of course, Stephen Foster sounds different than Flo Rida. But the fact that people create music and we enjoy music has never changed. The way we receive that music has changed many, many times. And each time it's changed, it's what in the modern lingo is called a disruption. So when radio first came in, there was great brouhaha because they were taking work away from local musicians because now people could listen to the radio. When recordings came in, radio fought it horribly because the music on the radio was live. Now the musicians were losing work to records. Cassettes came in, and the big brouhaha was that now people could record their own music. So you could buy a record, I could borrow it from you, and I could put it on a cassette, and they've lost a sale. This keeps going through with the MP3s, with Napster and all that. Now, instead of downloading the music or stealing the music off the internet, with Spotify, it's what they call a streaming service. It's kind of like when you watch Netflix. You hit a button, you don't own that movie on a DVD when you're watching Netflix. It just comes into your house through your computer. Spotify is the same thing. It's a streaming service. Now, if you just click on Spotify to listen to music, it's pretty much a wonderland. You can search, they've got something, I think it's 14 million songs at the moment. They don't have every song ever recorded, but they have a pretty darn good chunk of it. If you listen without subscribing, you hear ads, and in like an old-fashioned TV, the ads are about 3 times louder than the songs, so they make you jump out of your seat. The longer you listen, the more ads you start to hear. Now, if you subscribe, I sound like I'm a pitch man, $9.99 a month, but I'd be a pitch man for Spotify. I love it that much. $9.99 a month, you lose the commercials right out of the gate. You get a higher quality of audio. The streaming is at a higher quality. And then the wonderful thing is you can now download that music to any of your devices, your iPad, your phone, etc. Different than owning the music, it's almost like getting a book out of the library. You download that music and you have it on your device for 29 days. Now, if you listen to that music, you have it for 29 days after the last time you've listened to it. But if you just let it sit there, after 29 days, you go, oh, I had that one on my playlist, I want to hear it. You click the button, and it tells you have to re-download it. So if you're in your car, you're not going to be able to listen to that one, but anything else you had downloaded, you can. You go home, you re-download all those. So it's, in effect, like having a library book. You've got this for a certain amount of time. Now, unlike the library book, you can just, as long as you keep playing it, it stays on your machine forever. The day you say, I don't want Spotify anymore, and you cancel your subscription, you don't have any of those files anymore. You could go back to the free service and listen to them, but you can't download them to your device. So, for example, as a crazy music geek, there's lots of bands that I enjoy, but maybe not enough that I've kept their records. I've sold so many records over the years, just in terms of downsizing. Well, now you can jump on and listen to the Doobie Brothers, you can listen to Neu, you can listen to, crazy, obscure, super popular, all very easily on Spotify, and it just comes directly to you. It's just, for me, it's a magical experience. As a working musician, one of the things I do when I'm going to do a performance with a fellow musician, he'll tell me what songs we're going to work on. I make a little list. I just hit that list and listen to it in the car over and over to familiarize myself. So, yeah, Spotify. $9.99 a month. Yeah. There is currently a pretty large controversy with artists feeling that the way the royalty structure works is unfair. Seabrook fact, 77% of the profits in the music business go to the top 1% of performers. So kind of like the 99%, it's 77% in this case. So artists like Roseanne Cash and Mark Ribot, who I mentioned, who consider themselves working musicians, they're not receiving as high a royalty rate as Taylor Swift. Part of my thought, and like I said, I can justify anything, is by listening to them on Spotify, whatever fraction they're making of a penny from me listening is more than they would have got if I stole their music off the internet, if I took it out of the library, if I bought it used at a record store, which those were many of the ways I got music, so at least it's contributing something towards them. But that will remain controversial as they figure out how these subscription models work.
Taylor Swift has pulled her music from Spotify.
Yeah,
So
she pulled it and it's back. Now, first of all, my advice is if you can't find it on Spotify, go to YouTube. But Taylor created, and there was lots and lots of articles about this in industry trade magazines, Billboard, etc. Did Taylor Swift pull her music because as an artist she was upset about the right structure, remembering that while she might not make as much off Spotify plays as she would off a direct album sale, for the 3 million kids that bought her record, there's probably 9 million listens on Spotify. So somewhere she's still making a whole ton of money off it. Many people feel, and I don't know if this is true, she seems like a pretty smart artist to me, but some people feel it was a publicity stunt, that by making a crow about it, it would bring more attention to her and she'd sell more records. And she has now relented, and you can find it on Spotify, which makes you wonder if that's what that was an old school publicity stunt. Record sales, Seabrook talks about this in terms of physical units of records, have been ravaged over the past 20 years because of the internet. Just like, I worked in newspapers, publishing is taking a very hard hit from the internet. It's changing lots and lots of businesses. The post office, the fact that they're not sending mail anymore, they've lost an incredible amount of revenue. And as the different industries and individuals work through what to do with the internet, all of this is going to keep changing. But it's for the foreseeable future, it's how we get our music now is through the internet, maybe even more than the radio.
What's going to happen in the industry if only the top 1% are making all the money? I mean, how can an artist...
The top 1% are virtually always with major labels. So while the music business doesn't make as much money as it used to, the major labels are still making lots of money. They're also, they've struck up agreements. Some would say they're in cahoots with Spotify for their back label. The back labels of these companies, all the records of Elvis Presley, all the records of the Beatles, all the records of the Doobie Brothers, whoever had hits, those catalogs are worth a lot of money. And so they're using those to leverage to make money. Seabrook talks about something that was a popular trend about 8 years ago called the long tail. The idea of the long tail was that, let's take Amazon.com, for example. You're an artist living in Poughkeepsie. You make a record, you get it on Amazon, you can sell enough copies of that to help you survive. Where in the past, when you didn't have that kind of distribution system, that wouldn't be a possibility. There's a company called CD Baby that allows independent artists to sell their records, gives them a very nice amount of the money. It's a really reasonable sort of a cooperative thing. And it's a way for you to survive as a small independent artist. That didn't exist before. The only way you could do it was by selling your records at the gigs you went around to, but getting your name out was difficult. So the internet helps all those small artists, and it helps the big artists. But that figure of 77% and 1%, that goes way back. Even in the days of regular top 40 hit radio in the 70s and 80s, that fraction was somewhere in that same ballpark, that just the real big winners are the ones who make all the money.
You talked about the idea that 77% of the money goes to the top 1% at this point in time. How is that different from when we only had LPs, where again you had a number of artists who were struggling to get on the radio or places in record stores,
Yep.
and then you had the fabulous hit makers who were making all that money?
I was telling Joe before we started, a friend of mine from Delmar, a kid I knew when we were both young kids. I don't know how he pulled this off. I'm very, very thrilled for him. He's now the president of Warner Brothers Records. In between that path of being a teenage kid playing the drums in Delmar and becoming the president of Warner Brothers Records, he was for a couple years Sheryl Crow's drummer. And they came to town on a bill with Tom Petty, and I met him that night and I said, what's it like? And he said, it's exactly the same. He goes, after the gig, the manager's in the office arguing with the venue about how much money we get. He goes, it's like being at Bogey's in 1979 and going, I know there weren't that many people here, Dave, but you still owe me the money, you said. So it's all matters of scale. So that 77.1%, it wiggles back and forth. But in the 70s and 80s, it was the same situation. You had young acts trying to get on. The difference is, because of the way the label systems were set up, if you were a good band, played hard, got yourself some management, then you might end up on that major label. You'd be way down the roster, but at least you'd have that. The majors aren't doing that anymore. You pretty much have to be an idol winner or something like that to get on the major label. Now the indies, you can just do it yourself. Recording equipment is so inexpensive these days. The most recent record I made as a solo record, I worked with Chris Wink over at WAXT, and he very kindly, to try out some of his new equipment He let me come in and record for free. I produced a run of 200 CDs, printed, on the labels, the whole 9 yards, for $700. That would have been unheard of in the past. So the indie musicians now have that ability to just do it on their own, and so many of them have said, I don't even want to hear about the major labels or the music business. They're able to do it now. The other big difference, and this is a profound difference, is when you went to a concert in the 1970s or the 1980s, you went to see Queen in 1979 at the Glens Falls Civic Center. Oh my God, my head exploded. They were there to sell records. Their concerts were an ad for their record sales. And they made virtually all of their money from record sales. That is no longer true at all. Now, does someone like Taylor Swift make money from her record sales? She sure does. But now you have so many pieces of the pie being taken out. Lawyers, producers, on these songs. Joe said, he goes, I'm reading the book, he goes, some of these songs are written by 9 people. Beyonce, when her record recently lost to Ryan Adams, they pointed out that Ryan Adams had written every song on his record by himself. The Beyonce album had 27 writers. So the songs are made by committee. Each one of those people, little piece of the pie, little piece of the pie, little piece of the pie. Each of their lawyers, little piece of the pie, little piece of the pie, little piece of the pie. So when Taylor Swift sells a lot of records, even though she sells a lot of records, it's nothing like the records people sold before. About 2001 is when the bottom fell out. You had albums by the Backstreet Boys. Their debut album selling 27 million records. That's a lot of money. Even when there's a lot of pieces of the pie, that's a lot of money. They don't sell that many records now. Now when artists go on tour, they're using the record as an advertisement for the concert. And Taylor Swift goes home with a lot more money in her pocket from a concert than she does from record sales.
And what you also have is in the old days, people would just steal, one person would steal a higher percentage of it. So you'd have to look at what are all those small little slices of the pie. Is that equal to the major theft that occurred by one person who decided, oh, I wrote that song with Little Richard.
Right.
And I'm getting half of this now.
So Seabrook points out, I forget the names in this specific instance, but so with this track and hook method, literally a producer will sit down, he's got a bank of different pre-recorded beats and stuff. He'll pick out a beat. He'll manipulate it with his machinery so it's that sounds pretty good. He'll bring this part over. He'll create a chord structure on top. Now, in the classic ways we think of a song, what a song is somewhere over. Well, now what they'd write is dun, 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 and they have somebody else come in and freestyle. They literally la 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 now la 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 no, la la la. Yeah, let's use that one. They try all these different things. So they create the whole song. They will have the entire 3-minute pop song with no words and no melody. It's just 3 minutes of ba-boom, boom, ba-boom, boom, and then something changes. They come in, improvise over the top of that. So he pointed out how somebody's contribution to the song was literally la la. They did a small part of the bridge, and it became kind of a legal tussle over, I contributed to that song, and the person rightfully wanted their part of it. Now, if we step way back to the days of Elvis, Colonel Tom Parker, there was an amazing songwriter named Otis Blackwell, All Shook Up and so many other great hits. He wrote each and every one of them entirely by himself. Look at the records. All Shook Up, Otis Blackwell, Elvis Presley. Colonel Tom said to Otis Blackwell, if you want Elvis to record your song, you have to give him half the publishing. Now, the way publishing works is you have the writer's half and the publisher's half. So from the 100%, you have the 250%. The writer's half, there's 100% of that, there's 100% of the publisher's half. So now, Colonel Tom owns the publishing on the song. He's got the 100% of the publishing. Otis Blackwell has 100% of the writer's half. The math gets very tricky. Now, because of the deal he struck, Otis Blackwell has 25% of the writer's half, which is less than 25% of the value of the song. But because Colonel Tom was manipulative and brilliant and sneaky and awful, he said, if you want to make that, so let's take Roy Orbison, Pretty Woman, was co-written by Roy Orbison and William Dees. To this day, William Dees' estate makes over $1 million a year from that one song. When the movie came out, he was still alive when the movie Pretty Woman came out. It was in the soundtrack. Royalties from soundtracks are higher than from record sales. He made millions and millions and millions of dollars for owning part of that one song. So when Parker said to Blackwell, you can either get a fraction of a great big pile of money or nothing because Elvis isn't going to record your song, Blackwell took it. There are stories like that through the music business, on and on and on, of how people got manipulated. So.
So how do you feel about the quality of music today if music is being created by sound machines?
Thank you for asking. I get a little, I don't know if outspoken is the right word, I get a little pissed off. I actually think I've made it a philosophical choice to react this way, but I don't like it when people say, oh, the music today is crap, the music isn't as good as it used to be, because guess what it is? It just doesn't feel that way to us. So when I was 15 and listening to Aerosmith, my parents thought my music was crap. Well, I read the liner notes on the records, and I eventually discovered that Aerosmith actually came out of this little old band called the Rolling Stones, which I was young, I didn't know. Read the liner notes on the Rolling Stones record and find out it came from Slim Harpo. First time you hear Slim Harpo shake your hips, your head falls off. It's just brilliant. So I use those records to find the roots of it and to find this new music. So I still love Aerosmith, I still love the Rolling Stones, and I still love Jesse Malin, who's sort of a spiritual son of Aerosmith. It's related in enough ways that excites me. Every single concert, I'm pretty sure every single concert at a venue, let's say the size of the Palace or the Times Union Center, is somebody's first concert. There's somebody there just getting filled with that thrill of music. Tweens, 12, 13-year-old kids listening to the radio. Songs like Taylor Swift, Britney Spears, Backstreet Boys, those will be just as important to the youth of today as the songs from our childhood was. Everybody here can name a song from when they were 15 that they still love. When it comes on the radio, it blows their mind. We don't feel that way about Taylor Swift's music because, frankly, she's not recording it for us. She's recording it for kids. And Seabrook points out, as he's playing some of these songs with his daughter on acoustic guitar, I was telling Joe, one of the groups I play in, Lost Radio Rounders, we've been together almost 10 years. I had played with my partner in the band, Tom Lindsay, in a rock band called Chefs of the Future in the early 80s. Well, he stopped playing music for about 14 years. And we were doing an art show about visual art by musicians, and Tom hadn't played music in so many years. He said, I'm embarrassed, I'm in this show of art by musicians, but I don't play anymore. He goes, let's do a few songs at the opening. So we did Cheap Trick Surrender. Cheap Trick got into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame today. We did Buddy Holly's Learning the Game, and we did Backstreet Boys' I Want It That Way, which was still on the charts at that point. And when he first said Backstreet Boys, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Then I listened to the song and said, this is just a great song. It may have been written by 15 people using machines, but we played it on acoustic guitar and mandolin, and it just sounded beautiful. It was a beautiful song. So I think there's lots of great music being made today, and often when people say there's no music, there's no new music, they're just not looking hard enough. I think music's pretty eternal, and is my steady diet the songs that Seabrook talks about in this book? Not in any way. But occasionally when they come on the radio, Wrecking Ball, Miley Cyrus's Wrecking Ball, is just tremendous.
Yeah, to follow up on that gentleman's question, my own opinion is the rise of things like rap and hip-hop parallels in many ways the decay of the country.
Okay. Could you speak a little?
Am I off base on that? I mean,
no, could you speak a little more directly to that? I'd be interested in.
Well, we've gone way down in education. I mean, we have no more morals in this country. Anything goes, a whole bunch of things. That's pretty specific.
I would say, though.
And that is at least in the same time frame as the rise of rap, hip-hop, and this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's my view.
And that's, I think everybody's view has a lot of weight to it, especially in something as personal as music. I don't know if I'd agree with you on that view, and the counter that I would have is that for each of those sort of elements of negativity, there's new music being made that's very positive and makes young women, for example, feel stronger about themselves, makes African Americans feel stronger about themselves. So there is that to be said, and on cursory listens, I mean, the language in a lot of the songs, it's not what we would expect out of our pop music. But when I was listening to Aerosmith at 15, they had sort of randy songs with double entendre, and at that point in time, they were pushing the envelope, which now has led to what we have now. But there's good and bad to that. But I think that's a valid opinion.
I think that if you look at the songs that moved from the 50s through the mid-70s, early 80s, there was that pushing that envelope. There was the use of language that was startling to people. And some of the lyrics that started out, in the 50s, some of the girl groups and things like that, were not highly educated. I really disliked many of those rap songs because of the way they look at women and the way they characterize, intimacy. But I think it's just a continued progression. And with them, you have the ability to say, I don't want to listen to that, and to work with your children to understand how these songs aren't really reflective of how things should be going on between people.
One of my least favorite musical experiences now is modern country radio. And so Seabrook talks about how these songs are made from formulas, but nothing seems as formulaic to me as the bulk of modern country radio. I'm a huge fan, a huge student of classic country music. If you took the songs that are hits now and played them for Webb Pierce or Hank Williams, not only would they blanch, not only would you probably be arrested, you would also be taken out back and have the crap kicked out of you because you didn't talk like that. The fact that I just said you'd have the crap kicked out of you. 1950, we wouldn't say that in a public place. We would have been more reserved than that. Is that the fall of Rome? I got to tell you, man, on some days I think it is. I think some of the things we have on TV, some of the things we have on radio. Now, philosophically, I try to take a big step back and say we're expressing ourselves, but other times I'm thinking, my kids are 22 now, but we saw a lot of things on TV that I thought, I don't want my kids seeing this yet. So what I did was I was proactive about it. I said, well, we're not going to watch this. I tried to be involved in that. But you can't be involved all the time. Our youth are being exposed to lots of abrasive language, lots of abrasive thoughts, possibly to immorality, etc. And how we cope with that is going to be how we progress. But it is a very, very tricky spot with what the music represents. And again, with rap music, for example, we are not the audience for that music. It's younger people, and quite frankly now, and this is proven entirely by facts, the hip-hop audience is largely, like 90 to 95% white suburban youth. It's not black people at all. It's being made by African Americans, but the audience is kids in Clifton Park with their pants way down low.
All right, well, thanks, Michael, for coming.
Thanks. I enjoyed chatting with you.